The commercial airliner hummed through the darkness at 37,000 feet, its cabin bathed in the ethereal blue glow of reading lights and phone screens. Most passengers dozed fitfully, caught in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep that defines red-eye flights. In seat 14C, a woman in her early 30s slept with the practiced stillness of someone who had learned to find rest in helicopters, transport planes, and far worse places. Her auburn hair fell across a face that bore the subtle marks of someone who had seen too much sky and too much war. Captain Marcus Razor Rodriguez of SEAL Team 6 shifted in his aisle seat 3 rows back, unable to sleep despite 48 hours without rest. The mission briefing had been classified beyond his clearance level, which meant it was either routine intel gathering or something that could start a war. He studied the other passengers with the hypervigilance that never truly switched off, cataloging threats that probably didn't exist on a Delta flight from Seattle to Virginia Beach. That's when he noticed her hands. Even in sleep, they rested with a particular orientation on the armrests, thumbs positioned as if gripping a cyclic stick, fingers curved as if ready to adjust collective pitch. Rodriguez had seen enough military aviators to recognize the muscle memory that transcended consciousness, but what made him lean forward slightly was the faded tattoo visible on her left wrist, a stylized rotor disc with 4 blades, encircled by words too small to read from this distance. "That's our pilot," he whispered to his teammate beside him, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant by it. The woman's eyes opened suddenly, not with the confused blinking of normal sleep, but with the instant alertness of someone accustomed to emergency scrambles. For just a moment, she scanned the cabin with the same professional assessment Rodriguez had been conducting, her gaze lingering on emergency exits and the closest lavatories, tactical thinking disguised as post-sleep orientation. She caught him staring and offered a polite nod before closing her eyes again, but Rodriguez had seen enough. The way she moved her head had revealed more of the tattoo. 160th SOAR, curved around the rotor disc. The Night Stalkers, the most elite helicopter unit in the world, the people who flew SEALs into the impossible places where wars were really won and lost. Now he understood why his team leader had been so cryptic about their transportation arrangements for the mission. This wasn't a commercial flight, it was a cover story. The woman in 14C wasn't just going to Virginia Beach. She was their ride into whatever hell awaited them there. 30 minutes later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Norfolk International. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Lieutenant Colonel Valentina Vixen Kozlova opened her eyes and checked her watch. Right on time. She had learned long ago that precision wasn't just a virtue in military aviation, it was a survival skill. The SEAL in row 17 had been watching her for most of the flight, probably wondering how a woman barely over 5'6" had ended up with 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment credentials tattooed on her wrist. She wondered the same thing sometimes. The descent into Norfolk carried more turbulence than usual, and Kozlova found herself unconsciously adjusting to the aircraft's movements, her inner ear automatically calculating pitch angles and rate of descent. Civilian pilots were competent, but they flew like accountants, safe, predictable, uninspired. Military aviators flew like poets writing verses in 3 dimensions, finding beauty in the precise application of physics to seemingly impossible problems. As the landing gear deployed with its characteristic thunk and vibration, she caught fragments of hushed conversation from the SEALs behind her. Mission parameters, insertion times, weather conditions, the familiar language of professionals preparing to do dangerous work in dangerous places. What they didn't know yet was that their mission had already changed. The phone call she'd received during her layover in Denver had been brief. Packages compromised. Traditional insertion impossible. Need creative alternatives. Translation. Whatever they'd originally planned to do had been blown, and now they needed someone who could think outside the tactical manual. That's where she came in. The Boeing 737 touched down with barely a bump, Norfolk International at 0347 local time, with ground fog rolling in from the Chesapeake Bay. As passengers began the ritual shuffle of deplaning, Kozlova remained seated, watching the SEALs gather their gear with the efficient movements of a team that had worked together long enough to communicate without words. Captain Rodriguez approached her row with the careful politeness of someone who wasn't entirely sure of protocol. "Ma'am, I believe we're supposed to make contact with you." She looked up at him with eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue with flecks of gray that seemed to shift depending on the light. "That depends, Captain. Are you boys ready to go flying?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Behind Rodriguez, his teammates had stopped their casual conversation. They sensed something significant happening, though none of them were quite sure what. Kozlova stood with fluid grace and retrieved a well-worn flight bag from the overhead compartment. As she pulled it down, her jacket sleeve rode up, revealing more of the tattoo. Beneath the rotor disc and unit designation, a smaller inscription in elegant script: "Death waits in the dark." The motto of the 160th SOAR. "Gentlemen," she said, slinging the bag over her shoulder, "I hope you brought your strong stomachs. We're about to redefine what you think you know about air mobility." Rodriguez exchanged glances with his team. They'd been briefed on challenging insertions before, but something in this woman's tone suggested they were about to enter entirely new territory. As they filed off the aircraft into the humid Virginia night, none of them noticed the three men in expensive suits watching from the terminal's observation deck, or the way those men immediately reached for their phones when Kozlova appeared in the jetway. The real mission was about to begin. The Norfolk Naval Station at 0400 hours existed in that peculiar military twilight, where night shift personnel moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned to work in darkness. Kozlova led the SEAL team through a series of security checkpoints with the confident stride of someone who belonged in every restricted area they entered. Her credentials opened doors that remained closed to most full colonels, let alone the typical contractor pilot these men had expected. "Ma'am," Rodriguez finally asked as they approached what appeared to be a maintenance hangar, "exactly what are we walking into?" She paused at a biometric scanner, placing her palm against the surface. "Tell me, Captain, what do you know about the MH-6M Little Bird?" "Light attack helicopter, special operations, fast, maneuverable, minimal signature." "Correct. Now tell me what you know about flying one in weather that officially doesn't exist, into airspace that officially doesn't exist, to extract a package that officially doesn't exist." The scanner beeped, and massive hangar doors began sliding open with the deep mechanical groan of heavy machinery. Inside, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights, sat something that looked like a little bird's dangerous older brother. The airframe was matte black, angular surfaces designed to scatter radar signatures. The rotor system appeared standard until you noticed the additional blade count and the sound-dampening shrouds. Most striking were the engine exhausts, canted and baffled in ways that suggested someone had spent considerable time thinking about thermal signatures. "Gentlemen, meet the MH-6X Wraith. Stealth technology integrated with proven Little Bird reliability. Maximum range 400 nautical miles, service ceiling 20,000 feet, and most importantly for tonight, a radar signature roughly equivalent to a large seagull." Rodriguez's team approached the aircraft with the reverential attention special operators reserved for tools that might keep them alive. One of them, a compact man with sergeant stripes and the calloused hands of a weapons specialist, ran his fingers along the rotor hub with obvious appreciation. "How many of these exist?" he asked. "That's classified," Kozlova replied. "But let's say there are few enough that each one has a name instead of just a tail number. This is Whisper." She began her pre-flight inspection with movements that spoke of thousands of hours and dozens of aircraft types. Her hands moved across control surfaces and inspection points with the unconscious competence of someone for whom mechanical sympathy had become second nature. Your mission briefing mentioned a time-sensitive extraction, she continued, checking oil levels and hydraulic reservoirs. What it didn't mention was that your target is currently in a facility that's got more air defense coverage than most small countries. The hangar's secondary lights came on, revealing equipment staged around the aircraft. Fast rope rigging, night vision systems, and communication gear that definitely wasn't standard military issue. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully, "this is starting to sound less like a routine extraction and more like the kind of operation that ends careers if it goes wrong and starts legends if it goes right." She looked up from her inspection checklist. "Your call, gentlemen. There's a transport helicopter waiting on the other side of the field if you prefer the conventional approach." In the distance, the sound of jet engines spooling up suggested that Norfolk was experiencing more than its usual late-night activity. Whatever was happening, it was happening now. Rodriguez looked at his team, reading their faces in the harsh light. These were men who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments the military could offer, and they were looking at him with the quiet expectation that he would make the right choice. He turned back to Kozlova, who was now strapping herself into the pilot's seat with the methodical precision of someone preparing for combat. "Ma'am, what's the target's status?" "Alive, aware, and expecting us." She initiated the startup sequence, and the Wraith systems began their quiet electronic symphony. "The question is whether we can reach him before his captors realize he's been more than just uncooperative." The engines came online with a whisper, instead of the typical helicopter roar, sound dampening that bordered on the supernatural. "Time to insertion. 47 minutes, but we'll be flying through 3 different surface-to-air missile engagement zones to get there." Rodriguez made his decision with the certainty that had kept him alive through 7 years of special operations. "Load us up." As his team began securing their equipment in the aircraft's minimal cabin space, Kozlova continued her startup checks with the calm focus of someone who had learned to find peace in preparation. The Wraith's avionics displays painted her face in pale green light, and for a moment she looked less like a pilot and more like some technological priestess, communing with forces beyond ordinary understanding. "Captain," she said without looking up from her instruments, "in about 30 seconds, this aircraft is going to do things that don't appear in any flight manual. I need to know, do you trust me?" Outside the hangar, the Virginia night had acquired the particular quality that preceded dawn, though sunrise remained hours away. Somewhere in that darkness lay a target, a mission, and answers to questions that hadn't been asked yet. Rodriguez settled into the co-pilot's seat and pulled on the headset she handed him. "Ma'am, if I didn't trust you, I wouldn't be here." The Wraith lifted from the hangar floor with the silence of a ghost ascending. Kozlova's voice came through the intercom system with the calm professionalism that defined military aviation. "Norfolk Tower, this is Wraith 01 requesting immediate departure, Vector 270, flight level unrestricted." "Wraith 01 Norfolk Tower, cleared for immediate departure, Godspeed." The controller's voice carried a weight that suggested he knew exactly what kind of mission was launching into the pre-dawn darkness. As they cleared Norfolk's airspace, Rodriguez noticed that the normal commercial and military traffic seemed to have vanished, leaving them alone in a sky that felt vast and suddenly very dangerous. "Time to target, 39 minutes, Kozlova announced, banking the aircraft into a heading that would take them over the Chesapeake Bay and then somewhere that didn't appear on any map Rodriguez had ever seen. Through his night vision goggles, the world below became a patchwork of green-tinted geometry. the regular patterns of suburban development giving way to the organic curves of rivers and forests. The Wraith flew low enough that he could make out individual buildings and vehicles, but high enough to clear most obstacles with comfortable margins. "Ma'am," he said over the intercom, "can you tell us anything about what we're flying into?" Kozlova adjusted their heading by 2 degrees and checked her navigation display before responding. Target is being held in a compound that was built to be invisible from satellite surveillance. Underground facilities, minimal surface footprint, and enough defensive capability to make a frontal assault inadvisable. Hence the stealth approach. Hence the stealth approach. She paused to coordinate with what sounded like an AWACS controller, using brevity codes that Rodriguez didn't recognize. But here's what makes it interesting. The facility was designed by someone who understood American Special Operations doctrine very well. That got the team's attention. Rodriguez could hear the shift in breathing patterns over the intercom as his men processed the implications. How well? Well enough to have anticipated every conventional infiltration method we teach at Bragg. Kozlova's voice carried a note of professional appreciation for a worthy opponent. Motion sensors calibrated to detect human movement patterns. Thermal imaging systems positioned to cover traditional approach routes. Even the helicopter landing zones have been mined or equipped with automated defensive systems. The aircraft banked more sharply now, following what appeared to be a river valley that wound through increasingly mountainous terrain. Rodriguez checked his GPS and found that their location had become classified. The display simply showed their position as a moving dot in a gray void. So how do we get in? We don't use conventional infiltration methods. The satisfaction in her voice suggested that she'd been waiting for this question. We use physics. Behind them, Rodriguez could hear his weapons specialist checking equipment with the nervous energy that preceded complex operations. The team medic was reviewing emergency medical procedures in whispered tones. The communications expert was setting up satellite links that would allow them to coordinate with assets Rodriguez hadn't been briefed about. All routine preparations for missions that were anything but routine. "Ma'am, can you be more specific about the physics?" Kozlova increased their airspeed, and the Wraith responded with the eager acceleration of an aircraft designed to outrun surface-to-air missiles. "Tell me, Captain, what do you know about nap of the Earth flying in mountainous terrain during atmospheric inversion conditions?" Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten, enough to know that it's usually a good way to become a smoking crater. Usually. But atmospheric inversions create thermal layers that can hide helicopters from ground-based radar if you know how to exploit them. And mountainous terrain creates radar shadows where even the most sophisticated systems become effectively blind. They were flying through a landscape that had become genuinely hostile, peaks that rose to within 100 feet of their altitude, valleys that twisted in ways that made navigation a three-dimensional puzzle. The Wraith handled it all with a stability that suggested its design had anticipated exactly these conditions. The facility we're approaching was positioned to take advantage of natural radar shadows, but that same positioning creates blind spots that work both ways. Rodriguez was beginning to understand. We're not trying to avoid their defenses. We're using their defenses' limitations against them. Exactly. In 14 minutes, we're going to thread a needle that's approximately 50 feet wide, flying between radar coverage zones that overlap by less than 30 seconds. Miss the timing, and we become the most expensive fireworks display in recent memory. The intercom fell silent as everyone absorbed that information. Outside, the landscape had become genuinely mountainous, with peaks that disappeared into low-hanging clouds. The Wraith's navigation systems painted their route as a red line that seemed to snake between obstacles with mathematical precision. "Ma'am," Rodriguez's communications specialist called from the back, I'm receiving what appears to be a distress beacon. Very weak signal, but it's transmitting a code that matches our target. Kozlova's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the flight controls. Time to signal. Began approximately 4 minutes ago. Intermittent transmission, but consistent with someone trying to communicate while under duress. Rodriguez felt the mission's parameters shifting in real time. Their target wasn't just waiting for extraction. He was actively trying to help them find him, which meant either he had managed to escape captivity, or this was about to become significantly more complicated. Update time to target, Kozlova ordered. 11 minutes 30 seconds. The Wraith banked into a valley so narrow that Rodriguez could see individual trees on both sides. Their altitude above ground level had dropped to less than 200 feet, low enough that he could make out the texture of rock formations and the glint of water in stream beds. This was flying that existed at the absolute limits of what was possible with rotary-wing aircraft. One miscalculation, one equipment failure, one moment of inattention, and they would join the statistics of military aviation accidents that were classified too highly for anyone to learn from. But as Rodriguez watched Kozlova work, her hands moving across controls with unconscious precision, her eyes constantly scanning instruments and terrain, her voice maintaining the same calm professionalism despite the obvious stress, he realized that he was witnessing something approaching artistry. This wasn't just flying. This was flying as practiced by someone who had learned to treat the laws of physics like a musical instrument. The distress beacon grew stronger. The valley ahead curved sharply to the right, and through the darkness Rodriguez could see lights that definitely weren't stars. The facility appeared exactly as Kozlova had described it, minimal surface footprint, positioned to be invisible from above, but clearly sophisticated in ways that spoke of serious money and serious purpose. Time to target 4 minutes, she announced. Gentlemen, this is where things get interesting. The Wraith began to descend into what appeared to be certain death, following a flight path that existed only in the intersection of mathematics, intuition, and training that bordered on the supernatural. Rodriguez checked his weapon one final time and prepared to find out exactly what they had come so far to retrieve. As they approached the target facility, the Wraith systems began detecting the electronic signatures that Kozlova had warned them about. Radar installations swept the surrounding airspace with methodical precision, their beams creating an overlapping network of detection that would challenge even stealth-equipped aircraft. But she had positioned their approach to exploit the one gap in coverage, a narrow corridor created by the intersection of terrain masking and atmospheric conditions. Passive defense systems are active, Rodriguez's communications specialist reported. I'm reading multiple surface-to-air missile sites, automated gun systems, and what appears to be some kind of directed energy weapon. The directed energy system is new, Kozlova murmured, adjusting their flight path by degrees. That wasn't in the intelligence briefing. She brought the Wraith into a hover approximately 200 meters from the facility's perimeter, using a cluster of large boulders to mask their thermal signature. Through night vision equipment, the compound resolved into sharp detail, a modest surface installation that probably housed nothing more than administrative facilities and guard posts, with the real infrastructure clearly located underground. Target acquisition, Rodriguez announced, studying the structure through his scope. Multiple entry points, but all of them appear to be monitored. Thermal imaging shows at least 12 personnel in the surface buildings, with patterns suggesting regular patrols. The distress beacon was now strong enough to triangulate, and its location presented an immediate problem. Beacon is transmitting from approximately 40 meters underground, the communications specialist reported. Signal strength suggests significant structural impediments between the transmitter and surface. Kozlova studied the facility's layout on her tactical display, correlating intelligence photos with real-time observation. The underground complex extends much further than our briefing materials suggested. We're looking at a facility that could house 100 people comfortably, with multiple levels and what appear to be independent life support systems. Rodriguez was beginning to understand why conventional infiltration methods had been deemed inadequate. This wasn't a simple snatch-and-grab operation. It was an extraction from what amounted to an underground fortress. "Ma'am, what are our options?" Before she could answer, the tactical situation changed dramatically. Motion detectors around the facility's perimeter began activating in sequence, not because of their presence, but because someone inside the compound was moving toward the surface. Emergency lighting came online, bathing the installation in harsh white illumination that destroyed their night vision advantage. "Something's happening," Rodriguez observed with military understatement. The distress beacon suddenly increased in power and began transmitting what appeared to be text data in addition to its location signal. The communications specialist worked quickly to decode the information. Message reads, "Compromised, moving to extraction point Alpha, hostile pursuit, time critical." Kozlova made a decision with the swift certainty that defined combat aviation. New plan. We're not extracting from inside the facility. We're providing air support for someone who's extracting himself. She brought the Wraith up from its concealed position and began moving toward what appeared to be a natural clearing approximately 500 meters from the main compound. The aircraft's systems immediately began detecting multiple targeting radars attempting to achieve lock-on, but the stealth modifications were proving their worth. They remained effectively invisible to the facility's defensive systems. "Contact surface level," Rodriguez called out, spotting movement through his night vision. "Single individual moving rapidly toward the clearing, appears to be carrying equipment." The figure was clearly being pursued. Muzzle flashes from the facility indicated that multiple personnel were attempting to prevent the escape, though their fire discipline suggested they were more interested in recapture than elimination. "That's our target," Kozlova announced, beginning her approach to the clearing. "Time to extraction 90 seconds. The Wraith settled into a landing pattern that would allow for immediate departure, its engines remaining at flight power despite the risk of detection. Through the aircraft's open doors, Rodriguez could see their target clearly for the first time. A man in his 40s, civilian clothes, carrying what appeared to be a sealed briefcase and some kind of electronic equipment. But what struck Rodriguez most was the man's demeanor. Despite being pursued by armed personnel across hostile terrain, he moved with the purposeful calm of someone who had planned for exactly this contingency. 30 seconds to pick up, Kozlova announced. The facility's defensive systems had finally detected their presence, and warning alarms began sounding across the compound. Searchlights swept the area around the clearing, probing for targets that their automated systems couldn't identify with certainty. "Surface-to-air missile system is attempting to acquire lock," the communications specialist reported with professional calm. "Still unable to achieve targeting solution due to stealth configuration." Rodriguez and his team prepared for immediate departure, weapons ready to provide covering fire if the pursuit got too close to their landing zone. The target was now 50 meters away and closing rapidly, but the hostile personnel were also closing the distance. "Contact," Rodriguez called out as armed figures appeared at the tree line. "Multiple hostiles, small arms fire incoming." Kozlova held the Wraith steady despite rounds impacting the ground around the aircraft. "Target is 20 meters out. Hold position." The next 60 seconds unfolded with the compressed intensity that defined combat operations. Their target reached the aircraft and dove into the cabin with practiced efficiency, immediately securing his equipment and shouting coordinates that suggested he had information about additional hostile assets in the area. "Go, go, go," Rodriguez commanded, and Kozlova lifted the Wraith from the clearing with an acceleration that pressed everyone against their seats. Surface-to-air missiles began launching from concealed positions around the facility, their thermal signatures painting bright streaks across Rodriguez's night vision display. But the Wraith's stealth capabilities and Kozlova's tactical flying kept them ahead of the targeting solutions, banking and climbing through a three-dimensional maze of missile trajectories and radar coverage. "Clear of immediate engagement zone," she announced as they crested a ridge that put solid terrain between the aircraft and the facility. "Time to safe airspace, 12 minutes." Rodriguez turned to examine their passenger, who was already connecting his equipment to the aircraft's communication systems, with the efficiency of someone who had anticipated this exact scenario. "Dr. Marcus Chen," the man introduced himself, extending a hand that was remarkably steady for someone who had just escaped from captivity. "And gentlemen, we need to talk. What I discovered in that facility is going to change how this entire operation is classified." As the Wraith disappeared into the Virginia night, carrying its passengers toward answers that none of them had expected, the facility behind them began implementing security protocols that suggested this extraction had been more significant than anyone had originally understood. The real mission was just beginning. Dr. Chen's first words after they had cleared hostile airspace carried implications that shifted the entire operation from routine extraction to potential international incident. "The facility we just left isn't operated by any organization that appears in official intelligence databases," he said, connecting his equipment to the Wraith's secure communication systems. "The technology they're developing there represents advances in electronic warfare that are approximately 5 years beyond anything in current military inventories." Rodriguez exchanged glances with his team. They had been briefed on extracting a researcher who had been gathering intelligence on foreign weapons development. Nobody had mentioned that the weapons might be designed to counter American military systems. "Sir, can you be more specific?" Rodriguez asked. Chen opened his briefcase and removed what appeared to be a standard military-grade tablet, except for modifications that spoke of serious engineering resources. "They're working on adaptive radar systems that can learn to defeat stealth technology in real time. The algorithms they've developed can analyze radar returns from stealth aircraft and extrapolate complete flight profiles within minutes of first contact." Kozlova's voice came through the intercom with a note of professional concern. "Doctor, are you saying that stealth technology is becoming obsolete?" "Not obsolete, but significantly compromised if these systems become operational." Chen activated his tablet, displaying technical schematics that made Rodriguez grateful for his weapons training rather than his engineering education. "What's more concerning is that the research appears to be funded through a consortium of private military contractors with connections to at least 3 different nation-states." The implications were staggering. If hostile forces had developed reliable methods for defeating American stealth technology, then the fundamental assumptions underlying military air superiority would need immediate reassessment. "Sir," Rodriguez's communications specialist interjected, "I'm receiving priority traffic from Norfolk. They're requesting immediate status update and estimated time of arrival." Kozlova checked their navigation display. "Time to Norfolk, 34 minutes, but I'm picking up multiple radar contacts that weren't there during our outbound flight. Someone's very interested in our return route." Through the Wraith's tactical displays, they could observe aircraft movements that suggested a significant military response was developing. F-22 Raptors were being scrambled from Langley Air Force Base, while Navy assets from Norfolk were establishing what appeared to be a protective corridor for their approach. "Doctor," Rodriguez said, "exactly how sensitive is the information you're carrying?" Chen looked up from his tablet with the expression of someone who had spent considerable time contemplating that exact question. "Sensitive enough that there are probably several governments willing to start shooting down aircraft to prevent it from reaching Washington. As if summoned by his words, the Wraith's threat detection systems began indicating missile lock attempts from long-range surface-to-air systems. The signatures suggested ship-based platforms operating from international waters, technically legal positioning, but strategically threatening. We have multiple hostile contacts attempting target acquisition, Kozlova announced with the calm professionalism that military pilots brought to life-threatening situations. Recommend we accept fighter escort and expedite approach to Norfolk. Rodriguez made the call that would escalate their mission from covert extraction to potential international incident. Norfolk Control. This is Wraith 01 requesting immediate fighter escort and priority approach. We are carrying time-critical intelligence and experiencing hostile electronic warfare activity. The response came immediately. Wraith 01 Norfolk Control. You are cleared for escort rendezvous with Raptor flight, call sign Hammer. Vector 090, maintain current altitude. Be advised, we are implementing DEFCON 3 protocols for Norfolk airspace. DEFCON 3 meant that their extraction had triggered defense readiness conditions, usually reserved for major international crises. Gentlemen, Chen said, closing his briefcase and securing his equipment, I should probably mention that the facility's research wasn't limited to defeating American stealth technology. They were also developing systems specifically designed to target special operations helicopters. Rodriguez felt the mission's implications expanding beyond anything their original briefing had suggested. Sir, are you saying that aircraft like this one are specifically vulnerable to their defensive systems? I'm saying that the Wraith stealth profile was probably known to them before we ever left Norfolk. The intercom fell silent as everyone processed that information. If their stealth capabilities had been compromised from the beginning, then their successful extraction had depended more on luck and Kozlova's flying skill than on technological advantage. Contact fighter escort, Kozlova announced. Hammer flight is taking positions on our flanks. Norfolk approach is now controlled airspace. Through the aircraft's small windows, Rodriguez could see the distinctive profiles of F-22 Raptors moving into protective formation. Their presence transformed the night sky from empty darkness to controlled military airspace where any unidentified aircraft would face immediate engagement. But as they began their approach to Norfolk, Chen's equipment detected electronic signatures that suggested their extraction had triggered responses extending far beyond Virginia airspace. International communication networks were experiencing unusual traffic patterns, and several military satellites had adjusted their orbits to provide enhanced surveillance coverage of the eastern seaboard. Doctor, Rodriguez asked, what exactly were you researching before you decided to leave? Chen looked out at the fighter escorts maintaining formation around their aircraft. I was trying to determine whether the weapons systems being developed at that facility were intended to defend against American military capabilities, or whether they were being designed to enable a first strike that would neutralize American military capabilities. The distinction carried implications that extended far beyond their current mission. As Norfolk's runway lights appeared in the distance, Rodriguez realized that their extraction had uncovered information that could reshape American military strategy. The question now was whether they would reach friendly territory before someone decided that the information they were carrying was too dangerous to allow into official channels. The Wraith touched down at Norfolk with the precision that had characterized Kozlova's flying throughout the mission, but the reception waiting for them suggested that their arrival had been anticipated by more than just their mission controllers. Military vehicles surrounded the aircraft before its rotors had stopped spinning, and personnel wearing insignia from multiple intelligence agencies approached with the urgency that accompanied classified debriefings. Dr. Chen gathered his equipment with movements that seemed almost reluctant, as if he understood that transferring custody of his information would initiate processes beyond anyone's control. "Captain Rodriguez," he said, "I want you to understand something. The research I observed at that facility suggests that someone has been preparing for a very specific kind of warfare, one that targets the technological advantages that American forces have relied on for decades." Before Rodriguez could respond, the aircraft's doors opened, and they were immediately surrounded by security personnel, whose badges identified them as Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, and organizations whose acronyms Rodriguez didn't recognize. Dr. Chen, a woman in Air Force uniform, addressed their passenger. "I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell, DIA. We need to debrief you immediately on what you observed during your captivity." Chen stepped from the aircraft but maintained possession of his briefcase and tablet. "Colonel, what I observed wasn't captivity in the traditional sense. I was brought to that facility because they wanted me to understand their capabilities. Someone wanted American intelligence agencies to know exactly what they've developed." The implications of that statement created a moment of silence that spoke volumes about the complexity they were facing. If Chen had been deliberately shown advanced weapons systems, then his extraction might have been part of someone else's strategic plan. Rodriguez and his team were directed to a separate debriefing area, but not before Kozlova approached him with the expression of someone who had reached important conclusions during their flight. "Captain," she said quietly, "the electronic warfare signatures we detected during our approach, they weren't random. Someone was testing our aircraft's defensive systems, gathering data on how the Wraith responds to different types of targeting attempts." "Ma'am, are you saying that our entire mission was some kind of test?" "I'm saying that we may have just provided someone with detailed intelligence on America's most advanced stealth helicopter while thinking we were conducting a routine extraction." She looked toward the hangar where the Wraith was being moved for what would undoubtedly be extensive technical analysis. "The question is whether that was intentional or accidental." Rodriguez was escorted to a briefing room where his mission commander, Colonel James Harrison, waited with expressions that suggested the debriefing would be more complex than usual. "Captain, before we begin the formal debrief, I need you to understand that this mission's classification has been elevated beyond your current clearance level. What you experienced tonight has implications for national security that extend far beyond special operations." Rodriguez had participated in missions that remained classified years after completion, but he had never encountered a situation where the classification changed during the operation itself. "Sir, what exactly are we dealing with?" Colonel Harrison activated a secure display that showed satellite imagery of the facility they had just left. According to Dr. Chen's preliminary reports, the technology being developed at this location represents advances in electronic warfare that could fundamentally alter the balance of military power. But more concerning is that the facility appears to have been constructed with detailed knowledge of American special operations procedures. The satellite images showed defensive positions specifically designed to counter helicopter insertions, sensor networks calibrated to detect American equipment signatures, and facility layouts that anticipated tactics taught at American military schools. "Sir, are you suggesting that American military procedures have been compromised?" "I'm suggesting that someone has been studying American special operations with the same thoroughness that we typically apply to studying hostile capabilities." Harrison highlighted specific aspects of the facility's design. The defensive systems were positioned to counter exactly the type of extraction we conducted tonight. The fact that we succeeded says more about Lieutenant Colonel Kozlova's flying abilities than about our tactical planning. Rodriguez was beginning to understand why the mission's classification had been elevated. If hostile forces had developed comprehensive countermeasures to American special operations tactics, then every similar mission would require complete strategic reassessment. What are my orders, sir? Complete the debrief with full technical detail. Then report to the Secure Communications Facility for video conference with Pentagon leadership. They want to understand exactly what happened during that extraction and how our most advanced stealth helicopter performed against systems specifically designed to detect it. As Rodriguez was escorted to begin his formal debriefing, he realized that their successful mission had revealed vulnerabilities that could affect American military operations worldwide. The extraction they had conducted as a routine special operations mission had